Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, now I'm going to reveal what the whole story is, that everyone has got misinformation, lies, and completely got the story wrong. Now, it's near impossible to find anybody that isn't putting out bad information, either deliberately or only wanting to put out information that confirms what they already believe. Nobody is seeking the truth. And with so many cases, we have so many multi-layer problems, and people are believing schizophrenics, they're believing mind control people, and a lot of it just doesn't add up. Just the facts of the case don't add up. But it gets worse than that. Now, getting back to Maury, one of the biggest boobs ever invented. Now, I've been telling everybody from day one the kind of misinformation that he's been putting out. Now, I don't know if he was blackmailed, but he was a con artist. He was trying to make money milking the same story for 20 years. He had one book he put out that was a bestseller. I'm assuming he made some money from that, but he was also doing other things, including producing TV shows, apparently. Now, here's how bad information goes to worse. Now, on one of those TV shows that he was a producer, there was the apparently the honest cop, James Rothstein. Now, James Rothstein, for one reason or another, after reading that book and meeting him, thought that Maury was a good source. He appeared to be professional. Now, one of the problems with Rothstein is that he is really immature in his investigative abilities. And, it's kind of amazing. I know he's basically a good guy, but, I talked about this before. What percentage of their information is good? He buys into a lot of stories. A whole bunch of people don't trust Jim Rothstein's information or what he's doing. Not the fact that he's corrupt, but he's being talked to by other people. In a lot of ways, Rothstein is very naive. And there's been other cops talked to in the Son of Sam case that seem to be gaga. I think Berkowitz is just perfect, and they're in the so-called police department for 30 years undercover, and they can't figure out what Berkowitz was doing. It's typical, but good schizophrenics are like that. And of course, Maury was also getting information from the nutjob murderer himself. Can you really trust anything coming from Berkowitz? I don't think so. They're going to tell you all sorts of stories, and he's known to do that already. There's no way that we can trust this guy and his information whatsoever. But of course, well, that's all you got to go on, and for some reason you think you go to a prison who there's no way this guy is going to benefit from anything. You can't even give him money because you can't make money off of your crimes. To buy what David Berkowitz told him hook, line, and sinker. And people are conned by him today that he's now this wonderful guy. I don't believe he's repented whatsoever. I think he's a typical con artist. He's probably schizophrenic. This is one of his personalities now. I don't want to get out. I'm a good guy. Let's pray to Jesus. The same old prison rot you get every place. I don't believe anything that David Berkowitz tells anybody about anything. And you have to be very naive. Just as the fact that James Rothstein thinks that because he helped some prostitutes who her life was in danger, that some reason all the information that he gets from that prostitute and others is going to be great information. Now, being a little trustworthy does help, but also you're a sucker if you think you're not being fed disinformation directly, so you do things wrong, grab the wrong people, and Rothstein has been caught in many bad situations where he's working on bad information, and many people have said that. Now, one of the problems is that he believed Maury, because guess what? Rothstein never heard of many of the things happening in this case, and particularly he never heard of the Process Church. Where did he get that information from? Maury. So watch the circle here. Watch how bad information gets worse and worse and worse. And of course, this has been going on with just about everything. And I continue to do research in different areas. And if you listen to people reporting stories that have their little YouTube channels, they're all got an axe to grind. A lot of them are radical, born-again types that everybody's a demon. They are trying to find information so they look good. Well, I told you that was the case. And the whole idea is, no, that's not the case. No, you're trying to get information that builds your particular situation up. And these people don't have any credibility. You go through a lot of the people that are out there, and they're criminals, drug sellers, they've had other problems. It goes on and on with these stories that these people have little credibility. And then they say how great they are and how they're helping people. Well, that doesn't mean anything to me. And then out of one side of their mouth, they've said how they've been bought off by credit card companies. So these are the problems. And their past partners are psychotic born-agains. So the whole idea is that we have to understand how they twist information. And here's a prime case of it. So Maury Terry tells Rothstein that everything that he's found links the processed church. Now, being as naive as Rothstein is, he claims he checked stuff out, but did he? Because there really isn't anything to back up anything against the processed church whatsoever. It's the same old story of rumor after rumor for the actual red herring, and it serves a great purpose. Remember, red herrings take all the heat off of the real perpetrators and put it on people who are basically innocent. Now, basically what's come down with the processed church is, why were they ever labeled? Well, we'll talk about where that came from as well. Now, there is a researcher who put this all together, and I'll put a link down there so you can listen to his full story. But I've checked these things out. I've read different books where there's mentioned in, etc. So, the bottom line is where did all this come from? Now, when you hear the chain of information, you'll understand it. So, where did all this information come from? Well, we know that Stein got his information from Maury Terry, who he considered a good source. What? And just like so many other sources you thought were good, Rothstein, when they really weren't. Now, most of your stuff is good, and I appreciate the fact that this is an honest person, but it doesn't mean they make good judgments. I've talked about it. What percentage of the information is bad from anybody? No matter, they think it's good, but it's bad. Or are they twisting it and everything else that goes with it? Now, when you start getting into these things, it's just like the disinformation on Manson and other things. Charles Manson never killed anybody. I mean, basically, he was a pimp and a con man. And the bottom line is, that's it. He sold drugs. He did other things. He worked for the mafia selling drugs. The perpetrator of those murders was which was all about $1,000 worth of drugs that were owed to him, money that was taken from Tex Watson, Tex, this psycho guy who's, of course, why wouldn't he be, related to the police department in Texas, where they kill people for fun. And, of course, we saw what the great honorable Texas police did recently. So the whole idea is that's where all the training schools, where all the criminals go. They go to Texas and they're trained. They work with the street gangs. They work with regular people who they use as informants and who they pay hundreds of millions of dollars to people all across the country. They all go to Texas and are trained there so they can harass you, the citizens. This is all part of the organized criminal crime, otherwise known as your police department. So the whole idea is that's where he was from. After he murdered people there, with, I guess the girls were involved, but he murdered two innocent people. The Blagyankas were neighbors, and he went in there and tortured that couple horribly. Texas. So the whole idea is that that's who the culprit was. So Charles Manson had absolutely nothing to do with that. He had a very little amount of violence in his criminal record. He was a guy who worked for Universal Studios. He actually had a storefront escort service. He worked with Universal Studios, writing scripts and music. The Beach Boys recorded a couple of his songs. I don't think they ever paid him, and he went and threatened them and everything else. But I mean, this was a guy who was involved in that. But he's also involved in smuggling drugs for the mafia across borders, using his dune buggies, etc. So I could go on for hours with the details. I don't think people care, and it doesn't matter. Also, what was happening there is, where did this information come? Well, it's very interesting of how, as I said, bad information goes to worse. Now, we forget what's happening at this particular time there. So we've already got, and apparently there was lots and lots of drugs there in the entire house there, and the producer there. Apparently there's lots of drugs going to that house in general. So there was drugs smuggled through it. There were people connected to it. People used to buy drugs there all the time, including supposedly people like Dean Martin was mentioned by this person and other people. There's all sorts of pornography being shown there with apparently people being filmed as well. Noted movie stars of that time, some of the big stars, Yul Brynner was mentioned. And of course you can mention all these people because they're dead. I don't know how true all of that is, but apparently that was going on. Even Jane Wyman was supposed to be filmed there and different pornographic things, and so many other people. Some of it even had bestiality involved with it. Apparently there was some threesome going on with actually Jane Fonda, a dog, and some other celebrity. So what does all this mean? I mean, these are the kind of gossipy things that have been said. There's absolutely no proof of this that we know of. Of course, there must be film somewhere, but this has been alleged. Who knows? But there's all these things going on. But that's just shock value stuff. What was really going on is that the mafia was supplying that house and people in it with large amounts of drugs. They were directly linked to that. Now, this is where the trouble comes in. So, what happened to move the actual reality away from what happened there? They started to invent an entire new scenario. Who did this? The prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi. And of course, you have that famous book by him. Now, he was the one that gave the information to another person who wrote about the Manson family and put in a whole chapter on the Process Church. Well, that information about the Process Church came from Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote the book, Helter Skelter. It's very interesting because Helter Skelter had nothing to do with anything. Helter Skelter apparently was a name of an actual casino that Manson started that was illegal. Apparently it was busted by the police. So, and he needed money to put it back. So there's all sorts of little fascinating facts on there. And of course you think completely different. And as I said, Charles Manson never killed anybody. He had very little violence that he did in his career. He was a drug pusher, mostly a pimp, a con man, etc. That's mostly what he did, as well as all sorts of other things in Hollywood. But in that particular time, everybody was selling drugs because there was huge money in it. So he was apparently Manson was going across the border picking up drugs for the mafia, etc. And it was going through there, and this is where things get sticky and makes a lot of sense. Now, because of the nature of this particular crime, the mafia didn't want to be connected to it, thinking that they would be drawn into it, they'd follow it back up, and the police would be forced, of course, to arrest them. And this would be a terrible thing. And they didn't really have anything to do with murders, but they figured that these things would happen. Now, so Bugliosi told the guy who wrote the book on the Manson, there was another book on the Manson family, and they had a whole chapter on the Process Church. Well, this information on the Process Church came from Vincent Bugliosi. Where did he get this story from? And why was the Process Church demonized at this particular time? Now, people have a lot of nothing, just like everything else out there. There's a lot of red herring lies going on while the real culprits escape, and this is the way things go. Now, it's pretty sick that you allow that to happen because you don't want to admit you're wrong or don't know. And this is what happens with all these people. They're not seeking truth. They don't want to get the real people. They want to act like the police do, grab the guy who's closest, and of course, you want to sound like you're a big shot, whoever it is. But he wrote this chapter on the Process Church of the United States. I forget the actual name. That was in the book about Manson. Now, this was told to him by Bugliosi. And of course, he figured, well, this guy is the DA. Well, you're getting good information. But that author was taken to court in the United States, and the chapter about the Process Church was removed from that book because it was proved to be slander with nothing to back it up. Because the Process Church really did nothing. They did a little bit, and I'm going to tell you about what they were doing as well, because that seems to fit in. They were doing like everybody else was doing. But we'll get into that. But that chapter had to be removed legally. They couldn't prove anything, and none of that came. There was no evidence there that Bugliosi was telling this author, who made a whole chapter on it, that he had to remove. So who were the Process churches? Which they weren't the Process church by then anyway. People called them the Process church, but they weren't. They had changed their name 2 or 3 times. But let's keep it to that, because we all understand whom they are. Who is the Process church's biggest enemies? Well, and who is a nasty group of people generally, who has money and influence, and who was super big in Los Angeles? What organization was there who hated the Process church? Now, this never occurred to me either. But after all, and we all know the kind of viciousness that Scientology does, but Scientology was after them from the beginning. They quit the church, they took their instruments, they took their training, they added to it a little bit. So there was a direct attack on them, because that's what Scientology does. And if everybody did that, people would be taking their training and making money off us. That's what the Process church did. And they learned well and used that system to make a lot of money. But I don't think it was enough money. Because they had too much money. They lived too high in the hog. And it's hard to believe you could beg that much, but it's amazing how well begging goes. I heard somebody going over the amount of money they made from little bands and other things in busy places, like government centers or other things. They make thousands of dollars a day, but that still is enough. They had an awful lot of money. Living very high on the hog. It's a complicated picture there, but the bottom line is, I believe, and I have no proof to it, it's been alleged, but the bottom line is that it was Brother Eli, apparently, who was doing most of this stuff at that time. So what did everybody do in that time to make money? Manson did it. Everybody did it. Well, they sold drugs. And apparently it's even alleged that Brother Eli was buying and selling drugs and pornography, which, again, back then was illegal. Now, again, don't think pornography, and I don't think it was kiddie porn. It was just pornography. And the mob made most of the pornography up until the 90s, when it started to become more mainstream. So it's not unusual to do that. And you got to remember, pornography was horribly illegal in many areas, and it was enforced. So it was something that people spent a lot of money for. So the whole idea is you sold drugs, you sold pornography, and you made hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. So that's what I alleged the actual. So there has been a tying of the Process church to that. All the rest of it is fantasy, and the whole other things were started by Scientology, it's alleged again. Scientology went to Bugliosi and gave him all these stories. And we know that the Process church information is fake, because they went to court and they could prove nothing of what they said in that chapter, of whatever it was. I'm not hunting up that information. It's not important to me. But that chapter in that book that was published in the United States, they went to court, they won, and they had to remove it. So the whole idea is, we know the information was wrong, but who is after them? Who is trying to connect them to everything? Allegedly, the Church of Scientology. Makes sense. And what's in Los Angeles? Well, there's a huge Scientology headquarters in Los Angeles. That's a very famous one, where all the movie stars and everybody else have gone through. And it's still there today. I think it's an old converted hospital. It's a huge building. I know you can see it when you drive through downtown Los Angeles. So that's where the information came from. So the information about the Process church was given by Bugliosi to, guess who? Maury Terry, who didn't want to look too much anyway. So that's the progression. Now, where did all this other stuff? So the Process church was labeled all this stuff by the district attorney's office that went to Maury Terry, who picked it up as gospel and started telling everybody. Again, he had no facts or proof of anything. He then tells everybody else, who then becomes their lackeys. That includes James Rothstein and all the other people that have followed Terry like fools that they are, because he never came up with anything. He had no proof of anything. And if he did have proof of anything, he never released it. He knew he was dying. He put nothing out. And the whole story has been pushed out with the same old story. Now, multiple shooters, all these other things, well, it appears that this may be true, but we don't really know any of that. It's still a theory, and we can't really trust Maury because that's his bread and butter. He was pushing these things for years. He was using people to do all his work for him. He wouldn't talk to them, and he was pretty much a nasty little jerk. And the bottom line is that he then told his fake stories to other people who then bought into that, thinking that he was this great scholar. Well, that's exactly what happened there. So the bottom line is that the adversaries of the Process Church were their longtime nemesis, otherwise known as the Church of Scientology, where they started with, but then left in a hubbub. And they didn't just leave the church, they started their own organization to go against the church. Now, Scientology is really going to be upset at doing something like that. And I think they even took e-meters from them, which, you can't even sell on eBay because you can't sell e-meters. They claim they own all that. So they took that, they started their own courses. This is how they made a lot of money. They also figured out how to make a lot of money with courses and everything else. Certainly Scientology is a master at that. So they were able to do that, tie together. They offered courses, they sold magazines, they had coffee shops, and they were able to make some very good money. But I don't think I don't think you can make millions that way, which has been claimed by one of the Process members. Well, you can make millions if you start selling lots of drugs. And as I said, this reporter has claimed and alleges that Brother Eli was doing this. It's also Brother Eli that was spotted at these meetings with other people that they claimed they talked about killing people, which I find hard to believe. Why would you bring people in that are not involved with it? Really bad security to start doing that. But people claim that, whatever. He was there because of the drugs and the porno that he was selling. He probably didn't think they would even go through with it. Who knows? But, those are the people that have the drugs and the porno, so you have to deal with them. So I believe that's what was going on with the Process Church as part of what they were doing. But here again, that is not really known. Apparently, Brother Eli has been witnessed being around in several different locations. So again, it's alleged. We just don't know. Because everybody doesn't remember anything. They remember anything that makes them look good and proves their story. Yeah, right. So that's the story. So it makes a lot of sense that the huge organization in Los Angeles, which is known, by the way, to have great influence over the Los Angeles Police Department, who anytime they get a call on a Church of Scientology, basically don't do anything. So this is a long record. Leah Remini talked about this as well, that when she called the police about the Miscavige's wife, who hasn't been seen for months, they did absolutely nothing. And anytime things come up like that, they're going to do absolutely nothing. So we need to understand that. But what is the other problem here? Well, again, there's this horrible murder. The mob was delivering huge amounts of drugs to that house or around there, and they didn't want this found out. So they went and talked to Pelosi, and they said, look, we don't want this. And, of course, Charles Manson talked about this, of how this is what happened there as well. Pelosi, of course, does that name sound familiar? Well, it sounds to me like he's one of the boys. So, well, he's an Italian guy, and he's an old-school Italian. You got to remember, this is the 60s. I don't know where he was born, but most likely he was probably born back east in New York. And the point is that he came under pressure from the mafia. Maybe they threatened him or what. We all know, and I keep telling everybody, that organized crime runs this country. They can kill anybody they want. And certainly, they own all the judges, most of the police, etc. So the whole idea is they're not fearful of any of this. They don't want their drug operations exposed, but they were afraid that they would be blamed for the murders, and they would be horribly investigated, that there'd be a witch hunt for them, that the feds would come in and grab everybody, etc., and it would lead right to their front door. They needed a sucker. A red herring again. I keep telling people that. Who was that? Charles Manson. Now, Charles Manson, as I've mentioned, was really never that bad of a guy. Matter of fact, two of his family actually he got off of drugs. He refused to testify against the girls and Tex Watson. They even offered him a 18 months sentence. Well, if you testify against Tex Watson, you'll only get 18 months. Which again shows you they knew he wasn't involved directly. Or didn't care, or whatever that was. Who knows how all these things work. So, what did Manson do? I'm no rat. I don't do that. Well, here again, we got the good guy. He wasn't going to even get life imprisonment. He wasn't there. He didn't tell anybody to do anything. Yet he wouldn't go against Tex Watson because that was part of it. He's not a rat. He doesn't do that. So here again, Manson, with all of his bizarre activities, which I'll tell you right now is very typical of the 60s. Everybody was wasted on all sorts of hallucinogens, seeing pink elephants flying out to the moon, and all sorts of weird stuff was going on. So, at these times. And this was very common. Just imagine if you had, most of the young people were not just smoking dope. They were on hallucinogens. And I know people from that era, and that's what they did, particularly in places like San Francisco and, of course, Los Angeles. Everybody was using it. Hollywood had gobs of money, but it's the same old story. If you know anything about Hollywood, they don't like to pay their bills. Nicole Simpson. So the whole idea is that people show up and demand the money. And that's what happened here. So they didn't pay him $1,000 or they gave him bad stuff. I'm not sure what the exact story is. If you want to hear it, as I said, follow the link down below and you can hear the full story from the investigator guy who went through it. So I checked this out, and if you read the different books, well, basically it's in the different books. Manson talks about it. Bugliosi talks. Everybody talks about this indirectly, sometimes directly. So the whole idea is the Process Church, which has never been linked to anything, which is now doing very good work, saving thousands and thousands of animals, trying to stop the killing of pets of all types around there, trying to get a zero kill rate. They're doing very good work, and they've been doing this for 30 years now, and there's not a single statement that they're up to no good. So the bottom line is that, as I've said many times, they're top heavy, they put a lot of money in their pocket. Is that anything new? The Red Cross, head of the Red Cross, $1 million, 6 directors, $500,000. Oh, is that good? They do no work, and they're more likely to kill you than not kill you. What a scum organization they are. So the whole idea is that they have a clean bill of health other than what everybody else was doing back then, and that was selling drugs. Everybody was doing it. That's the way it was. Now, Manson was involved with the mob as well, and they, as I just mentioned. So what the mob said is that we got to pin this on somebody, and we got to make a whole big story up so that they don't look in our direction. Here on a silver platter, let's bring it Manson's head. Now, again, Manson isn't the greatest guy in the world. Of course, he was very abused. He was raped as a child in so many of these foster-type places. He had a weird lifestyle, and certainly is not necessarily the guy you want to live next door to. But he also was very functional to a degree. He was a songwriter. He sold his songs. He worked in the movie industry. Of course, he sold drugs because that's where all the money was. He also had prostitutes. That's where all the money is. So this is all the things that went on to hook that up. So where did Dumbbell Maury Terry get his information from? Vincent Bugliosi. So he talked with him. He gave him that information to pass on the con about the Process Church so they would be the red herring, the fall guy. Now, I think a similar situation has been going on and is still going on with Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, where everybody is blaming him. It's a little more complicated with him, but, if we could properly get military assistance here to know where his whereabouts were, we could prove some of his stories one way or another. Now, I'm not sure you could get that information, and certainly nobody cares. If you're talking about something happened 20, 30 years ago, and the guy is dead now, you're not going to get help from anybody, not unless you know politicians that are going to do something for you. So, I believe that's the case as well with him. There is all sorts of, quote, eyewitnesses, but these are all people with the Aquino case again that are basically mind control people, and I believe they were implanted with the memory of Aquino so that he would be blamed for everything. Makes sense to me. Let's get a guy who's the red herring. And they also, if he was involved in some way, well, he certainly didn't get arrested for it on top of it. So they probably didn't want him to get arrested so they could keep blaming him. So all of these things where people say it's him and everything else don't add up. You know, I've talked about this before, and particularly with the Kathy O'Brien story. You know, these are horrific things that have happened to these people. Doesn't check out. You're not going to get beaten horribly and then a couple hours later go down and be a prostitute. It's just absurd. It just doesn't happen that way. You know, this isn't the movie studios where you get shot in the arm and, you know, the next shot of them, of course, is you have a little bandage holding your arm up. Believe me, when you get shot anywhere, you're going to be in horrible pain, and your life isn't. Bullets are very weird. So, but the point is that's what they're talking about. Her stories are like that. Other people are claiming happened to them before the agent. No proof of any of this. But if we could follow his schedule, we could see where he was at certain times, and then we could have stronger evidence saying, well, you know, he was at Ott Air Force Base, which is really close to Omaha, Nebraska. There was trouble. Was he in Colorado at the time? They claimed he was there in some ranchy type place. You know, well, was he there? So if we can track him at least to the area, we would have some more circumstantial evidence at least. Nothing. So it's all this guy did it. Now you can see how information goes from good to bad. So the whole idea is Bugliosi tied in this whole thing, blew it up. I don't know if he was protecting himself or whatever was going on there, but he was working with organized crime, so it is alleged, to actually do that, to set up Manson as this horrible guy when he really wasn't. He was a thug, he was a pimp, all the little things, a drug smuggler. He wasn't this murderer. He was a criminal. And if you think he's doing anything worse than your mafia, your local street gangs are doing a lot worse. A lot of street gangs are murdering people. I understand there's 1,000 members of the Bloods and Crips found every year murdered. You're talking about hundreds of people are dying from these gang attacks. Usually they're killing each other. So I guess nobody cares. But the point is, this is ridiculous to point out anything. So just like so many people, the amount of actually deaths attributed to Satanists or other people is a drop in the bucket. Jim Jones killed over 1,000. And we can go on and on. David Koresh was having sex with 12-year-old girls and the whole thing going on there. What was there, 30, 40 children that got murdered because of him there? And so many of his other followers there? I mean, it pales in comparison. The crimes committed by the church and by Christians are a huge gallon of liquid compared to drops when it comes to so-called Satanists. So there's very few Satanists. It's a ruse in general, and people like it because it's sexy. The bottom line is that other organizations are murdering you, just like the U.S. military, who's fighting wars where they shouldn't be fighting, and your children are getting blown away. At least they're volunteers, unlike Vietnam, where they dragged people out of their schools, their colleges, their jobs for nothing. Now we have a volunteer nothing army that dies for nothing, and all they do is rape and rob, as the military is known for. Certainly they haven't achieved any success. So getting back to the other thing, so that's where it came from. So Vincent Bugliosi created this entire myth, this entire story, trying to make them look out to be all of this crazy, wild guy. He had nothing to do with Tex Watson, over $1,000, who was a complete hardened psychopath. He was known to be a psychopath. He was known to rip off. This is what he did. He ripped off drug dealers. And you know what that means? It means he has to be ready to murder people and be murdered. So this is what he did throughout his entire criminal career. And he felt he could get away with it because he was connected to the police department. So the whole idea, that was the guy. It had nothing to do with Charles Manson, who did not tell anybody to kill anybody and did not kill anybody. So they made him into this whole thing, and there's virtually nothing connecting Manson. They say he was brainwashed, M. Craven Multrix. He didn't do anything. They need to brainwash pimps? What are we talking about here? This is more of this lies and deceit by people who want to make fanciful stories so they can sell books. I'm amazed how many books are written on Manson. You can buy at least 35 to 40 books on Manson right now on Amazon. That are there. It's mind-boggling. So this is how information gets worse, goes from bad to worse. And then, of course, if you have some sort of credibility or somebody likes you, like what happened with the police officer Rothstein, thinking that Maury was a good source when he wasn't. And a lot of stuff was made up by him. It was, I don't trust anything from Maury whatsoever. I'm not even sure he followed the timelines of these shootings or anything else. I mean, the beginning of the book was pretty good, but is that information good? Then he goes into all these stories he was fed by other people. Now, these stories, again, he could have been threatened or contrived, but he was trying to make money. He wanted to write another book. Now, the bottom line is he even tried to get a book published through a basically fertile house, which is known for its satanic books. He tried to get his book published through them, but they wouldn't take it either, and he come up with nothing. He had all this information, supposedly, and you could wipe your bottom with it. It's nowhere to be had, and it's nothing there anyway. If anything is written there, it's complete contrived nonsense. And it's been sitting around for years now. Maury has died. I don't know how many. Maury has been dead for God knows how many years. Nothing's coming from there. Nobody's going to release that because it's garbage, not because they're afraid of. The Process Church has been, always will be a ruse. They have done nothing wrong, and if they were tied into, most likely, it appears, is alleged, that they were probably selling drugs and maybe a little pornography, and that's how they were making money, large amounts of money. And that was basically done by a few people within that organization. The other people either stayed away from it, didn't want to know it, etc. But it's the same old story. People come in with bags of money, and you look the other way because you want that money. So, and who targeted them? The people that hated them the most, Scientology. You had a vendetta against them. So I hope everybody gets this up. The whole thing was contrived and made up. This information came from what people would thought would be credible, which would be a district attorney. It was not. Manson has alleged that Bugliosi was working with the mafia to cover everything up. It's in his book, written by Shrek. And the whole idea is that it's all there. The pieces fit together. It makes a lot of sense. So the bottom line is that Manson did nothing. He had his own little family. As a matter of fact, the Manson family was the name of the rock group he was going to put together with the Beach Boys. That's where that came from. That wasn't something that was because of having a group of hippies together, calling it a family. The band was going to be named that. So I hope everybody gets all the pieces falling together, and people will stop listening to liars, deceitful people, people that have access to grind, and in general, that are bad people. All you have to do is listen to Maury Terry and find out what kind of a scumbucket he is and the misinformation. And then listen to the people who claim this was my friend or everything else. He wasn't anybody's friends. He milked everybody for what he could get out of them. He used people so that he could fill his pockets with money, and then took information, twisted it, and put it the way he wanted to so he could make more money at it. And ultimately, he didn't make any money at it. But, you know, he was selling his information to the tabloids. He made most of his money, from what I understand, from the Inquirer type things, where he made shock value articles, and they pay you very well for them. He had nothing else. And if he had any kind of great information, he certainly didn't release it. So I don't believe any of that either. I don't believe he had anything. There was nothing to have. Fact is he was on the trail of the Process Church, which did nothing. Process Church moved to Arizona, and there were no murders in that area whatsoever. They left that place to find another place in Utah, and this is after they'd settled there for many years. So they keep saying, oh, everywhere they wasn't everywhere they went, and some more lies. And the bottom line is for 30 years, there's absolutely nothing going on there. Now, whether if there's something going behind the scenes where they're still involved in things, well, I frankly doubt that. They certainly have this huge income. They're a nonprofit. They have to tell you where every penny comes from and goes. So I frankly doubt that's the case. They were able to build this up and got a lot of support from celebrities and other people because everybody wants to help animals, and they're doing that. The bottom line, they were involved in nothing. Certainly they were involved in no murders or anything else you hear about. Now, may have there been by Brother Eli, which again, some people have alleged of them selling drugs and some porno. Well, that's possible. But again, this is just porno. This is not child pornography. So the whole idea is that everybody was doing that. Everybody was selling drugs. Everybody was high on drugs. Everybody was taking hallucinatories. All of this is part of the process. And to say that they're weird or done things, well, have you seen organizations? What about all the Mormons that marry 10 women? They do it today, and they run con artists. There's a whole group of Mormons that are out there that are crooks, complete and total crooks. They keep all the women as slaves. They have 2 or 3. And, of course, guess what? Nothing's done about them. What about all the other crazy-ass organizations out there? It's to pick them because it's kind of sexy, and they weren't even Satanists. They were a Gnostic type, and quite frankly, their philosophy makes sense. The nature of mankind is sewer, dark, and evil. What else could it be? You going to somehow refute that? Well, stupid people lying to the left. Stupid people lying to the left. Now, that's it. Follow that line. Just happens to go off the side of a cliff. So that's the ridiculousness of it. So now you can see how this is all put together. So I'm going to be putting that link to that particular person's website. This is one of the few researchers that seems to get it. He doesn't get caught up in all the glamour of what the story is. He looks for the facts. He knows about how people are controlled, the corruption, where information comes from. So do check this guy out. He's one of the few people that seems to take the golden mean. He goes down seeking truth, not seeking to hang somebody like all the other people do. So this is a really sad situation that nobody is seeking truth. They're seeking to get them people I don't like, them Satanists. Yeah, well, we don't like you born-again nut jobs. So the whole idea is these people are filled with hate and evil, and they want to point to other people saying they're hate and evil, when it's the Christians that are molesting most of the children out there by the tens of thousands all over the world through their love church. And their Pope is a Nazi. And the one before that was a Nazi as well. I mean, it's unbelievable that these things aren't brought out there, particularly Pope Francis, who turned in thousands of priests who were tortured and murdered to death. Good Christians. So it's the same old story that goes with that, and I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of people following these stooges based on presentation and other people buying into it. And I've talked about that. What percentage of the information you get? You know, yeah, I got good information from him. Does that mean you're going to get good information from him again? Not at all. And people tend to think, oh, he was good once, he's always going to... Well, why would that be? People believe somebody because they write a book and because that sells. That's what James Rothstein did. He allowed himself to be duped by a guy who got bad information, and there's no way of checking this. He knew nothing about the Process Church, and if that was the case, Rothstein should have went to Bugliosi himself and talked to him to reconfirm things. But he didn't do that, thinking that Maury Terry had something. And then he uses a bunch of people, and they just kind of wag their tails and follow him. They continue to actually support this guy, saying, oh, I was his friend. Yeah, De Niro? But you didn't get anything from him. He lied to you, he used you, and you were a big sucker for this guy who had nothing but disinformation. Now, we don't know what the bigger stories are, but he put things together so that he would be able to particularly make money. Now, whether he was threatened, whether there's other people involved, but, it's interesting how none of these investigators are looking into the Satanists of today. They're not talking about E.A. Kennedy. They're not talking about people like Karl-Heinz Welz. They're not talking about all these people who have been running satanic lodges for many, many years, or all the other ones. Nobody is talking about any of the active. What about the Temple of Satan now? You know what they're doing? Well, you should be knowing what they're doing. I thought they're not studying Satanism. They're looking back 30 years ago where they think it's safe. So it's really pathetic when you get into those things. But here's the story, and it makes 100% sense. That this big drug operation ran by the mafia had to be covered up by using Manson as a fall guy who basically was nothing. And was nothing more than a low-level criminal. And the information that was given about people like the Process Church was done by their enemies. Well, all the pieces fall together. That's the real story, people. And watch for those links down below. There'll probably be a day or two before I put them up. But follow that link. Listen to the whole story. This guy has a complete story that tells you about it. I recommend this person's books and other things if you want real information. You want to listen to suckers? Well, good luck. Because that's what you're going to get. You're a sucker. You're following these things, and people continue to think that Maury Terry was some sort of good source, and people, you follow him, and you are now made the fool like he was. You're a sucker. And it seems that it's very easy to be a sucker, and maybe one of the reasons why we have so many problems is so many of these so-called detectives buy this stuff hook, line, and sinker. Just like David Berkowitz. Some detective knew him through. I saw him every day after school. Never thought he would do anything. Well, that's a cop for you. That's a cop. Here's a guy who is a psychotic mass murderer. Best guy I ever knew. This is the kind of stuff you run into. Or the fact is you buy something because a person is an author, writes a book, it's put together well, and you say, well, this guy must know something. Well, that's an amateurish thing to do. Buying into anybody and what they say is a mistake. I don't care who they are, what they know, or anything else. And the information you get today may be perfect. The information you get tomorrow, most likely, is wrong. And people keep hanging on to the same losers, trying to reaffirm the story that they reported. Instead of seeking truth and saying, well, we find this was wrong. Well, now we know. And as usual, it goes back to organized crime that runs everything. And basically what you're talking about is corrupt people. That means that Bugliosi was shifting things deliberately to protect these organized crime things. So it is alleged. But it makes sense to me personally. I buy it, but, I don't have any proof of it. Other authors have stated this in their different books. And the bottom line is to try and think that this was going on. Manson was not trying to start a race riot that was thrown in there yet again. It's nonsense. He wasn't a racist. He wasn't a Satanist. None of that stuff. Matter of fact, he refused. When he went into prison, he joined the Aryan Brotherhood to survive. When he refused to murder and attack blacks, they threw him out. And he was great friends with some blacks in prison. This has all been noted. So this is all the stuff. It's lies, people. This is fantasy to sell books. It just isn't the story. It's as simple as that. All this stuff is lies. And one lie gets twisted into a bigger and bigger knot until everybody is buying into the lies perpetrated there, and then they get repeated. Even though there's zero evidence to so many things. We all know that Manson never killed anybody. It's as simple as that. He was convicted on conspiracy to murder. That he said go, but he never pulled the trigger or stuck a knife. And it wasn't his idea to begin with. And nothing to do with him. He was in San Diego at the time that these murders took place anyway. So the whole idea is that's what happens, and then people want to demonize other people because it's an interesting story. So Maury Terry, let's bring Manson in. That'll sell more books. Let's bring in the Process Church. It's like so many of these people, let's bring in movie stars and Ronald Reagan and bestiality and all the things that go with it that people keep harping on, that at the very least are delusional. People who are under mind control, whose brains have been broken, who have been programmed to see and act in certain ways. So we're supposed to give them credit? Well, that's a dangerous thing to do. We have to be sure who the culprits are and take them out. If we don't, what we're doing is empowering the bad people, and the people that have really committed crimes get away with it, and they get stronger and stronger as we go to the red herrings. And that's what's happening in so many ways. And people will not do the right thing, and they will not seek justice and truth. They want to seek what they believe in. The bad Satanist because I'm a Christian. Well, yeah. Who is? Yeah. If you had to pick between the two, you want to look for evil, well, you can look to the Christians first, because they are filled with evil, much more than any Satanist that I've ever met. So the whole idea is we've got serious problems here from people that claim they are on the good side when they're the bad side. Now, everything is up and down, right and left. Everything is a confused mess, and because people make it that way, and they're not doing the research. Do the research, and you find things out. So all of that is part and parcel of what's going on to the entire process. On top of things like people didn't know that Michael Aquino was blind. He could barely see. It was the last few years of his life. So the whole idea is all this is all sorts of things that go on that nobody wants to look at. We got to find out who's done this and stop going on witch hunts because you don't like somebody. Because it's them today, it's me tomorrow, and that's the way it all is. And I've seen enough of this nonsense go on by these uninformed cowards. And by the way, all these uninformed cowards don't want to talk to anybody that knows something. Isn't that convenient? They put on people that pat them on the back and fill their heads with the same garbage to reaffirm their story. When somebody else has valuable information, they ignore them. Yeah? Well, that's pretty evil and sick. And it shows that you're seeking not truth. You're the Satanist. People that do that are out and out Satanists. So they like to call everybody else like that with their born-again-y attitudes. You're the scum. And those are the people that are causing problems, and we need to know that. Don't trust anybody. These people are liars. They're liars. They refuse to get it. When they get the facts, that isn't it. It's the same old story. I've heard this 100 times. They don't want to hear anything that doesn't agree with them, and that goes with all of the people out there reporting on these things. So those are the facts. Makes 100% sense. The whole idea is the Process Church has never been involved in any murders. It's possible they may have been like everybody else was doing, selling a little drugs, selling a little porn. Now, that's how you made lots of money. Everybody was doing it. So it's possible that they were involved. And as I said, some people link this brother Eli guy. So that's what's been stated by others. Again, we don't know. The whole idea is that this is nonsense, but the facts are out there, and people need to do that instead of doing. The fact that somebody goes to you and says, I worked there and I'm going to tell you what they were doing, is that a credible source? Someone shows up there and decides they want to inform on people that they were working with? Technically, they're just as guilty as the people there. So why are they doing that? How convenient that somebody goes from the so-called sanctuary, spends 3 weeks with Rothstein on his own dime to talk to them about it. And of course, the usual happens there as well. That information is flushed down the toilet. So it's worthless on top of it because nobody takes it and tries to use it in a way to prosecute people. But what is your motivation to do that? Well, that's a good question, unless you're feeding them with disinformation. Just like Manson did it. It's all Aleister Crowley. It's the same old story. It's Michael Aquino. He's everywhere. And, of course, he's not dead. He's living under a rock somewhere and going to vampire anybody that walks by. This is the kind of stupidity that has to come to an end. But it's never going to come to an end because the people out there that are doing it, and these are the alternative people. People like to say, oh, you know, the news is all disinformation and contrived. And the alternative news isn't. The people in the alternative news have less credibility than the regular news. They particularly go out there and spread disinformation when they know it's wrong, just to say that I was right. Pretty sad. I've got more information on these born-againers and their belief systems that are perpetrating a lot of these talk shows as well, which I'll be talking about in a week or two. I mean, you got to listen to these people and where they're coming from. Basically, these are people that are nothing more than born-again ministers who are attacking everything. And it doesn't matter what the facts are. They're going to do what they believe in doing. Not what's truth, not what's justice. They're going to persecute and attack people because that's where they're coming from. Pretty sad. Sad and evil. But that's the story. It makes 100% sense, and now everybody knows. So the mystery about everything, about Manson, about the Process Church, all that stuff is no longer a mystery. And as I've been saying again for several years, the Manson murders were just a non-payment of drugs that, of course, got out of hands with a psycho that was known for his violence and everything else that went there. So it's not shocking. Don't fall into the traps. Use your Gnostic thinking and reverse anything that you hear. Someone's guilty? No, they're not. That happened? No, it didn't. The whole idea is cancel out that invasive thinking that is bombarding you to push you in a particular way. Find the facts, but you're not going to get that from listening to the alternative media either. It's all a sewer. You have to use your own Gnostic thinking, and you get the facts from there. Until next time.